It was just a thought, a feeling?
It wasn't. I took a video of it.
Oh, you took a video of it?
She tried. She didn't get the whole thing.
Okay, so Taylor took a little mini video of some of it. So those of you who want to see Taylor's video, we also have a video that Dan's pulling up on YouTube, which I think their screen over here is something's broken. So we just...
Oh, yeah. Whoa.
So we have this screen here. And we're not going to watch the whole thing. But these are Jericho resurrection plants, and they're desert plants. And you're going to see here the Rose of Jericho. So these are plants that have a cellular structure that enable them to handle being almost, well, completely dehydrated for sometimes years at a time. And then when the rains, oh, you can play it, Dan. Have you pushed play while I'm chatting? Okay, thanks. Go ahead and play it. And when the rain comes, they open up. Some of them are very green, some of them stay brown. But this is the example that we had right here in front of us. How cool is that? And then we're going to kind of do some back and forth.
They're clapping.
I have almost like a heartbeat kind of deal. And this eyes, right? So the little ones start to come up. And you can see that this is something that's like in their DNA. But pretty cool. Yeah, super cool. So I wanted to hear anybody's comment on what they thought or felt about that before I add my meaning to it. Anybody have a thought or a response to it? Totally cool if you don't. Yeah, Jared does. I love that.
It's like we've heard from a number of people who have come here after somewhere else, come Desert Outpouring.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's how
At least
feel.
that's my personal experience.
I love that that's your thank you. That's your personal experience. I love that. Mine too.
So I was just thinking about how good God is to always bring life out of death, you know. It's amazing. But it did remind me of a particular time in my life when, I mean, there's been several, but there was one that was really big, and I just felt like everything I had spiritually had been stripped, and I was dead, basically. Yeah. And sure enough, you know, I just prayed and trusted the Lord, and I don't remember the time period, but all of a sudden I felt the life coming back, and it made me realize that what's inside of me is resurrection life.
Yeah.
So nothing can kill that.
Right.
No matter what we go through, challenges of life and everything else, sometimes we feel we're in that dead place.
Yeah.
But we have resurrection life inside of us, and God will bloom it again.
Absolutely. I love that. Thanks, Marcy. Anyone else want to comment?
It was just, to me, a reminder of the cyclical nature of life. Mm-hmm. You know, we've got seasons of dead, but then it comes back to life, and seasons of dead, and then things come back to life. And that just, it's encouraging to
Isn't
see
it?
that. Yeah.
It's encouraging to see that very plants were created, you know, in order
not mimic, but show, display.
To
God's
display
wonders. Yeah.
the capacity of plants, and then the capacity of ourselves. Yeah, so good. I feel like, to me, I've been holding on to this back in the back room to bring out on the right week, and I brought it out this week because I felt like it so symbolized like what has happened sometimes to our hopes and dreams. even like things that we had as expectations, and we feel like the hope and dream that we thought the Lord had and treasured has become a die-dusty little throwaway, and almost like the very existence of it irritates us. Is that hitting home with you? just right there. Just right there. Okay, just keep preaching. And so sometimes even our hopes and dreams become like almost a thing that we become ashamed of, that it's like this dirty thing sitting on the ground. And I just feel the Lord going, let me just breathe. Let me just breathe on that place with you. Let me just have a new conversation. Let me just release, the right ingredients in the right space at the right time. And let's see what will come to life. Because timing is such a key part of so many of our conversations with God. And so we'll talk more about that as adults. But for the kids, I'd like to let parents know that we started off a series called Secret Keepers. You can look it up online. It's an old throwback series, but it's one of my sister who's been a children's pastor for over 20 years. It's one of her favorites, and the kids always beg to have it back, and she only does it every 3 years. So
Does it have flannel graphs?
it does not have flannel graphs. It's video. So I was like, really? You really can use this old throwback? And so she really was a big fan of it. I watched a couple of them. Abraham and I watched a couple of them. He was a fan. And so we've actually been doing the Secret Keeper series with Jasandra back in the nursery. So if you didn't know that that's what was happening, that's what's been happening. And then we've been so blessed that Jasandra and her biblical background has been able to guide really great conversations about what happened in the early church, because those were the first secret keepers, people who held onto this precious secret inside themselves and then shared it with others. That is God alive in us is the great secret. And so she's been able to guide some really great conversations on like what was happening historically at the time of some of these stories that are being told in the videos. So we are super grateful for you, Jasandra, and we have a couple more weeks left that we get to have her do this with our kiddos. So on that note, we are going to release our kids to be champions and game changers, to be powerful and good and kind, and to have a great time together. And then that will free up some chairs, because apparently we're a table
We've got some
short.
chairs over here that are
Definitely,
free.
Yeah, chairs are free, and next time we'll bring in another table. It's totally my bad, right?
Janice was telling me they're going to get chairs, like 3 chairs, sit behind the back table and be judges.
You can put numbers on the cards, and you can put up what you think and what you respond to. Super good. All right.
Is it warm in here?
It feels
Okay.
super warm to be.
Because I'm
yeah.
comfortable,
Yeah, no, you are
as
not
well
a
as
gauge.
my fellow
Yeah.
cold-blooded Lindsay.
Yeah,
All
you're
right.
not a good gauge of what is okay anymore. Ever. Okay, so how many of you remember last week I gave you 2 questions to contemplate and consider? And I know that Anne remembers. Maybe not very many of you else do, but some of you maybe were processing. So I'm going to have Anne, if you wouldn't mind. And Greg, do you have, oh, he's doing the AC. Anne, would you mind sharing the 2 questions? I'm going to have you use my mic.
I'll be right
Hang
back.
on. You're good, babe. Okay. Thanks, Anne.
The first one is, where am I conscious dominant? And then I had as subpoints, assessments and judgments. And the second one is, what does my unconscious have to say about this area?
Yeah. Heather's like, what did I miss? It was a good week. It was a fun week. So we sorry.
Stop touching everything.
We discovered the problem. It's right there. It's on the cord, right? Okay. So the antenna. Babe.
You can mute it and then move it around.
If she thinks we've got this fixed, just keep talking, babe. Let's see if anybody hears you.
I turned it off for a moment, and then I readjust and then turn back on. Dan and I think that
Start
it'll
by
be okay.
plugging your ears.
We're good. Okay.
Sure?
Yeah.
All right.
So we were talking last week about our conscious and our unconscious. And for those of you who don't know the history of it, subconscious was used kind of equivalent to unconscious. So if you're more familiar with that term, and that really just meaning the part of ourselves that we are not consciously aware at any given time, typically is what a definition of the unconscious is. But I'm going to introduce this week a new possibility, which is that our unconscious is really a part of ourselves that processes and thinks and actually has a tremendous amount of wisdom. And many people believe that it's maybe kind of located in our heart area. And it's not so much about feelings. In fact, historically, the feelings were never associated with the heart. Does anybody know what feelings were typically associated with during, do you know?
Is the stomach?
Close, very, very close. She said the stomach, very, very close. Intestines is very close to the pancreas, I feel like I should have the flannel graph when we're just throwing this up. Okay, kidneys is getting closer. The liver. Does anybody think the liver? So we don't know. These were, these are theories by people, and theories come together and we discover evidence, we do testing on this and whatever. But historically, humanity has considered that we have 3 different areas that we access for wisdom. Our thinking, which is our conscious, they call it feeling, but I would call it perceiving, which would be kind of the heart area, the unconscious, and then our instinct, which is considered the gut. So you have an instinct. These are people who go by I know. Also, if you tend to be, and you know this so super well, so I'm counting on you to jump in here, but on these 3 centers, it's typically often how you feel like you hear God. It's often how you make your decisions. So if you make your decisions based on, I don't know why, I just know that this is the right decision. How many of you tend to be like that? Not all the time, but some of the time. You're like, I don't know why, but I just know. Okay, that's a gut-oriented person. That's an instinct-oriented person. If you put gut and instinct, that would be great. How many of you are someone who makes your decisions based on, well, I weighed the pros and cons. I made a checklist. I thought it through. Okay, my daughter, Doodlebug, perfect. Carrie, who else? You guys were laughing back here. Is that you? No? Okay. You could be, well, of course we are. Yes, of course you're a little of everything. I just totally spit everywhere also, just to exemplify that. Who else is a thinker? Okay, yeah. Right? So, okay, yes, okay, thinker, okay. And then how many of you are perceivers? So what that is you not necessarily know, but you're kind of like, I feel. You tend to use the feel phrase. So you're a feeler, you're a feeler, you're a feeler. People who are feelers can't not be feelers, typically, if this is their predominant thing. And so they might often perceive things through an emotive place. Yeah, Anne.
Is it possible that you could initiate whatever the idea is in one area, but then process it in another?
Okay, so because Greg was busy writing, we didn't bring back the mic, but the question was, could you start in one place and move to another? So here's the good news. The good news is, thank goodness, we are all of these things. We are all of these things, and we were always meant to be incorporated. We were always meant to be in union life, having access to all parts of ourselves. But through different life experiences, through the way that we're raised, Western society values which one of these most? Yeah, the thinker. This is the Greek ideal, and it is the best one. Weighing the pros and cons, thinking something through, has been idealized, and we even learn typically in the Western world through a thinking model, when there are other places that would teach through instinct and perceiving more. So we have access to all of these ways of knowing. And there are some who would say that this is kind of our conscious, and that there might be a way of describing these as part of our unconscious. So when we practiced meditation 2 weeks ago, that is the practice of allowing ourselves to access the wisdom of our instinct and our perceiver. And some people might even call that the spirit. So we are allowing ourselves to let the thinker come under by letting thoughts go. By continually releasing thoughts and letting thoughts go, we're allowing ourselves to come into maybe a listening to these other areas. So, any thoughts or comments before I move on? Really? We'll give you a second. How many of you feel most confident in one of these areas in the way that you talk to God? Yeah, so would you tell us about that?
Yeah, I would say I'm a perceiver, and it's just a feeling that I encounter. And it's not a feeling that I'm thinking about. It has nothing to do with anything that's happened in my life or my day. I just have a feeling, and then I ask the Lord to give me the words that are associated with what I'm feeling. And then I'll say, okay, and now is there a picture that you can associate with those words and this feeling? And when I can put all three of those together, then maybe somebody will understand me. But that's not all the time. Sometimes I can't get the full picture, and that's why it is nice sometimes when I'm with Ange or somebody can pick up on what I'm perceiving and even interpret what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
Because I can get a little even tongue-tied because I'm feeling it so strongly.
Right.
That it's kind of like if you zoom out like a camera. I'm trying to zoom out because I'm so in it. And sometimes I can't zoom out enough to get the full picture, and so sometimes somebody else can help with that. But yeah. I'm so deep into the feeling of it.
Right. So I'm going to help a few of you. How many of you would consider yourself somewhat of a perceiver? May not be your dominant, but you do know that you do a lot of things by perception. Or you know someone who's a perceiver. These are typically deep feeling people. They use feel statements frequently. They use the F word, feelings. In our house, the F word is feelings. Yeah, okay. So think of those people, or think of yourself as a perceiver. The perceiver, there's not language for the perceiver. So if you are talking to God and hearing from God in a perceiving place, you often don't have language. And that can make you think that you're not hearing or talking with God, which is completely untrue. It's just that our Western society values language so highly that we'll elect presidents over how well they can talk. Yeah. Right? We value language so highly, so much over so many other things. We will go counter to our gut instinct. We will go counter to our own feeling, our perceiving. We'll go counter to our ideologies or theologies based on the persuasion of what? Talking. That comes from the thinker. How many of us have gone against what we felt in our gut was the right thing because somebody gave us a persuasive argument? Right? And we have subverted an entire part of our wisdom that was designed by God to help us have wisdom. So often perceivers, when we do our practice here of listening, to God, they won't have language yet. They'll have, and so here's the thing, be okay with that and honor it and respect it and know that what you're perceiving is actually valuable in the space. You perceiving it in the space and releasing it in the space is actually a real thing. And it opens up the opportunity for someone else to perceive what you're perceiving without language.
I just want to defend the thinkers. It's not just cerebral. I'm a thinker, but my creativity is part of how I think, and for me, creativity is a process of synthesis and assimilation, and that's my favorite parts with God when I'm praying for people is when He meets me there in that creative space, and it's really explosive. And it's not about cerebral cold thinking. It's about expanding the mind and really kind of getting into God's mind and
Yes.
playing in there and stuff like that too.
Yes. So
that's also a part of thinking.
I'm totally with you, and we'll talk about thinkers and valuing that also. So I totally agree.
Well, I'm going to say
Yes.
that what you're talking about with somebody being able to speak, well, that is an expression that doesn't necessarily come from the gut, the brain, or the heart. But it's a different skill altogether, I would argue.
Okay.
Because there are plenty of thinkers, like me,
Who can't
who are
talk.
not very, I'm not too good with the putting the words together thing.
And that is true.
So would you call yourself a thinker?
Yes.
Okay.
I pop back and forth into a lot of these places, and we all do all the time, to be honest with you. But often thinkers are associated with people who can share their thoughts, and here's why. So here's something to consider. There are many scholars who would say that when you move from this place of perceiving into the place of thinking, that you are moving from a place that has ability to handle dichotomous realities into an inherent dualism. I don't know if this is true, but there are many who would propose that once you get to the thinking of things, the very thought of language as you're doing thoughts, and of course it's not that simple, the brain is so much more complex. We're complex and we're categorizing things that can't be categorized because we are a whole. Even when I'm doing language, what does it do? The language itself puts one thing up against another. It always puts one thing up against another. When I use the word orange, it means not red, not yellow, not black. Right? When I use any language here, it means not this, not this, not this. When you're in a perceiving place and sometimes in a gut place, there is no such comparison. There is no such this versus this. It's able to have a union perception, but when you start to get to thinking, it automatically starts to split things. Not because thinking is bad, thinking is genius. So we'll get to thinking here in just a moment. But just know that these are the parts of yourself that processes your relationship with God. It processes how you feel about yourself, how you are discerning the reality in front of you. And if you haven't practiced the different parts of you, it is time. And so the assignment that I had last week was for you to become aware of what are you consciously dominant about? What thoughts are dominating in the area that you're working on with God? You know that little area that we all kind of wrote down? If you don't have an area, grab one again and think about it. Where are you consciously dominant? What are your thoughts that are dominant? I'm going to give you an example in a minute. And then the next question was, what does your unconscious have to say about it? And I gave the encouragement, maybe do some meditation to release your thoughts so that you could become aware of other places. Now, the beautiful thing that the thinker does is the thinker is the one who contemplates, rolls things around. The thinker is the one who translates so much of what's happening from our inner being. The thinker is the one who is able to communicate. Even though you're like, yes, I get it. Some are able to communicate. But I would say you're a thinker, but you're also a perceiver, because you have massive feelings.
Oh, I'm all three.
You are.
I'm like the perfect embodiment.
This is what I've been saying all this time. This is what I've been saying. The perfect embodiment. Sometimes, if you're dominant in thinking, you have a hard time expressing your perceptions. Okay? Sometimes, not always. What I discovered was that I think I feel all my feelings. I've always considered myself a very feeling person. But it wasn't until I was at the Enneagram conference where they were doing a little bit of a training on this, and we were in this group together, and they were talking, and I'm like, one of these is not like the others. One of these just doesn't belong, and I'm it. I do not belong with this group of feelers. And I discovered, like, oh, I think about my feelings. And I think I'm feeling my feelings. Right? I can tell you all the feels. And it wasn't until recently I discovered I often don't want to feel my feelings. I'd rather think about them.
Yep.
right? So allowing ourselves permission to embrace the whole part of the wisdom that's available to us. Yes, oh, that spit just like hanging off my lip. I know, and I'm sweating, and it's like, it's just a mess happening up here.
Cold, actually.
Good, you should get your hat and bring it in, because like, yeah. I'm sorry, I'm sweating, you're cold, like.
It's on.
That's marriage. So, sorry, I touched in my back pocket. I'll try not to do that again. Okay, so this week I'm processing some things, and I'm praying about a particular situation, and I'm discovering that there is an issue of entitlement, is what I'm perceiving about a situation. And so I pray for that situation, and I pray for the, circumstance, and for this entitlement mindset that I'm perceiving somebody is having. And I'm praying for the Lord to awaken that person to their own sense of entitlement. And 24 hours later, I am just casually walking through my house, and I realize it has come from here into my realization, because our brain is typically like catching up to what these things already know. Not always. Thinking is so like, that's where genius is. And it's so creative and it's so beautiful. I love my thinking. Thinking is genius. But often, and this is what I feel like the Lord always told me, your brain is catching up to what I'm already doing in you. By the time you think it, you've already processed it in so many other places in you. And your brain is catching up to some of the greater realities that are already happening within you. And I love that part of it, because by the time I become aware of something that God's doing in my life, He's like, we've already been processing this. You already said yes to this. It's already a done deal. It's already, right? Because when somebody else comes to you and says, hey, I think you have a problem with ... doesn't your heart race a little bit? But when the Lord goes, hey, I think there's been a problem with ... it comes with such an empowerment. Your whole, there's no guilt, there's no shame, there's nothing. You're like, you're already over the hump. By the time God brings something up, by the time you become consciously aware of it, you have already, you're already over it. So anyway, I was praying for a situation and a thing of entitlement, and I discovered, and Nikki and I talked about this. Are you ready for this, Nikki? Yes. I realized 24 hours later, the Lord, I just had this thought, what about my own senses of entitlement? Dang it. It was so good. I was like, I just realized a huge amount of the pain that I've been experiencing for the last 2 years has come from a sense of entitlement. An entitlement mindset that I didn't realize I had. I thought I was entitled. I'll just throw out a couple of them for you, okay? Ready? Are you ready for this? I thought I was entitled to people's trust. I thought that people would automatically trust me because I believe I'm trustworthy. But I discovered in our relationship that there was not trust, and it devastated me. And the reason I was devastated was because I thought I was entitled to it. Right? Thank you. Right? I was like, oh shoot. And then I'm just kind of walking around still just kind of blown away going, well, I didn't realize I felt entitled. I felt like, and so entitlement, we all judge, right? Why? Why? Because the minute we start using the word, we start thinking about it. And that tends to make it good or bad. But there are places where entitlement isn't good or bad. There's places where entitlement just is. And we can allow it to be without assessment. And so I started to realize that in many of the places where I am super hurt and super devastated, it's because I thought I was entitled to something that reality showed me I wasn't. Now, there are certain entitlements that get broken that should be. Like, for example, our commitment to each other, I'm entitled to that because we've promised each other that. And if that got broken, yeah, I'm going to be really hurt because we're entitled to that. We made commitments, right? So those are entitlements. In fact, how many of you would like to just venture out a definition on entitlement? Again, we're going into a definition here, but somebody want to throw out an idea on what does entitlement really even mean? Heather.
I'm just going to throw out something.
Yeah.
The first thing that pops into my mind is just what I deserve.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Anyone else? Okay.
This is like the same thing, but something that is owed to you, or you feel like it should be owed to you.
Right. Right. What else? Change your mind, Ann? Okay. Anyone else? So if you were to look it up, essentially that is the thing. If you take all the classes and do all the requirement and pay your bill, at the end of 4 years in college, if you meet all the requirements, you are entitled to a degree and all of the benefits that come from it, right? So entitlement often has to do with perceived, thank you, agreements. Like Greg believes he's entitled to the marker because we have a deal that I won't write on the whiteboard unless he's out here with you guys. But the minute he comes back, right, he is...
The fact that I'm out there has nothing to do with the ability to write on my part.
But we get super devastated when we have a hidden sense of entitlement that we weren't aware of, and we discover that we don't get what we think we were owed or deserve. And that's when we have the life-crushing experiences when we don't get what we thought. And that happens in relationships, right? We don't get the respect, we don't get the opportunity. How about how many of us are dealing with unresolved hurt over entitlements? Right, thank you. Right, you didn't even have to wait for me to finish the sentence, right? Okay, how about this? Unresolved hurt about entitlements we didn't know we had with God. Right? So it's not the entitlement that's bad, it's the hidden entitlement that we didn't know, that didn't work out the way we wanted it to, and it lays there unresolved. And the moment we begin to think about how we felt entitled, what do? We shame it and we stuff it down, and we judge it instead of opening it up and going, where's the life? Where's the life in the dead thing that died a long time ago? Where's the life? What's the new conversation you want to have about the places where I am disappointed? Because we don't get disappointed about things that we didn't feel entitled to. Often our entitlement comes from, catch me if I'm wrong, how many of you have said this phrase? Well, I never would, ... I never would have, I would never treat her that way. I would have never done that on vacation. I would have never done that to him, right? What does that say? I am entitled to someone else having the same values I have. And how has that worked for us? Not so great. So in that space, we didn't realize that we felt entitled, right? To an equal, or what we saw as equitable and fair treatment of each other. How about how many of us have had an unequitable and unfair treatment in work? Right? How many of us were promised certain things in a work environment and we felt entitled to those very things and they didn't turn out? Right? Okay, so in the area that we are going after with the Lord, I feel the Lord saying, wait a second, just pause. So I'm just going to wait for a second, if that's okay, because I feel like we just opened up all of the stuff. And the Lord goes, we can't jump to the next thing. Let's just take a moment here. So how about we take a minute and just process with the Lord. If it's just being quiet, we'll just be quiet for a moment. If we want to let God speak to us in an area of our lives, if we want to just write down a couple of things of like, wow, these are the conversations I want to have with you, Lord. So let's just take about 60 seconds and just let the Holy Spirit just heal and speak to and love on areas in our lives where we've been hurt and disappointed. Okay. Okay. I know we have a lot of history on the word entitlement.